In today's episode, we're going to go over something that's a little more niche, and that is brown dye from cocoa beans. There are some things that we can do to make manual harvesting a little bit easier and faster, but we'll also build this fully AFK cocoa bean farm right here. But before jumping into that, let's talk about some of the mechanics so that we will know what method will fit our needs the best. Starting off with the basics, cocoa beans can only be planted on the side of jungle logs. But clicking on the side of the jungle log while holding a cocoa bean will plant that bean and it will slowly grow over time. Once it's fully grown, you can then harvest it. Now, most of us aren't going to use very much brown dye, if any at all, so this method would be totally fine, just having a wall of logs with some cocoa beans on it. But there are some things to keep in mind when it comes to manual harvesting. First and foremost is that fortune does not work on cocoa beans. It's super duper sad. Fortune works on most other crops, but it doesn't affect the rates of cocoa beans at all. The fastest tool to harvest the beans is with an axe, but this can be kind of sketchy when it comes to manual harvesting, because especially if you have efficiency 5 or a beacon nearby, there's a good chance that you're going to break your logs while you're harvesting your beans. So I typically like to make these rows, where I can just kind of mine out the center of it without accidentally breaking any of the logs, because you just kind of aim down the middle and harvest all of the beans, and then you have several stacks and you can just replant them and go. So this is typically my go-to for my cocoa bean farms. But the Discord member Anawan was talking about how he needed tons and tons of brown dye and he didn't want to wait. So instead, he just built himself a bone mealer for some instant cocoa while he waited on the other beans to grow. So I figured if it was good enough for him, then maybe some of y'all could benefit from this as well. Now this will consume bone meal, of course, but it is fully AFK. You can just hold down your mine button by propping something on your controller or your mouse, or even using a rubber band or something. But as long as you can hold down the mine button, it will be fully AFK until you run out of meal. Now one really interesting thing when it comes to cocoa beans is that you can actually push the beans around with a piston. They don't break when they move, which is super interesting. So because of this, to automatically harvest these things, we have to move the log that they are placed on rather than the beans themselves. But now let's build it. So the build area is going to be 3 by 4, and we're going to start off by placing a temporary block here in the back in the center with a sticky piston on top of that block facing forward. Now, one block from that sticky piston, we're going to place down a block, a jungle log, and then surround that log in more solid blocks. So this log will be 1 block away from the sticky piston. Then here on the front, we're going to place 2 dispensers, both facing inward, 1 on each side. And make sure that these are dispensers and not droppers. Then we want an observer facing down next to the topmost block, with 3 dust on top of those blocks. Then a repeater up here on a 3-tick delay, so poke that repeater 2 times. Then a solid block with some dust on top, and a redstone torch there at the end above the sticky piston. And we are now totally done. So if you plant cocoa beans on this log, it should activate the dispensers, and then activate the piston to break the beans. Now, of course, nothing will grow until you put bone meal inside of the dispensers. So go ahead and toss in your meal, and you'll basically get 3 cocoa beans per 2 bone meal. Almost 1 for 1, but you will gain more beans than you will lose meal. And so just hold down the mine button while staring at this log, and be sure to stand close enough to where you automatically pick up the beans. That way you never run out of beans during your AFK session. I would also recommend staring at the side of the log, where there is no bean growing. This will just ensure that you placing beans is never interrupted, so that you can just hold down the mine button and walk away. Now, if you want to AFK this for a really long time, you will need more bone meal. So we can just place some hoppers pointed into each of the dispensers, place a chest on top, and then load this full of bone meal to load up the dispensers. Now, we do want to be able to pick up the cocoa beans as we grow them, because we need to keep the slot that we have active completely full of cocoa beans at all times. Since we're constantly placing a cocoa bean, you need to replace that cocoa bean in the same slot in your hotbar. So we just dig a hole down here and use it from down here, and we will now pick up all the cocoa beans dropped by the farm, which will keep us stocked. So if you want to turn tons and tons and tons of bone meal into cocoa beans automatically, then go with that chest and hoppers. But if you only want a little bit, you don't have to worry about keeping the droppers stocked since they each have 9 slots anyway. And that's all there is to it. Let me know if you're actually going to build this cocoa bean bone mealer. I am super intrigued by its usage. Like, personally, I probably won't ever need to bone meal cocoa beans. I do always build a big old wall or a big old tunnel of cocoa beans, just in case I ever need the brown dye, but I don't use it very much, and I feel like most people probably don't use brown dye all that often. Maybe for terraforming, or I don't really know. Let me know what you use brown dye for. Do you use a ton of it? Do you just use a little bit? Or do you use none? Are you going to build this bone mealer, or is a wall good enough for you? Again, I am super intrigued, so I would love to know what you do. But that's all we got for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, favorite, share, and subscribe. And be sure to talk to me down in the comments. Even if you don't know what to say, just tell me hi. I would love to hear from you either way. Thank you so much for watching. Always remember that you are totally awesome. But above all, don't forget to have fun. Bye-bye.